You are listening to the System Impacted podcast powered by STEM Ops. STEM Ops, which stands for STEM Opportunities in Prison Settings, is an alliance of higher education partner organizations committed to ensuring that STEM preparation during and post-incarceration is commonplace and successful. More specifically, STEM Ops' mission is to ensure all persons impacted by the carceral system are able and encouraged to pursue a culturally responsible and equitable, high-quality STEM education and career. STEM Ops is funded by the National Science Foundation as a part of their Includes initiative, which aims to expand access to STEM careers by underrepresented groups. You can learn more about STEM Ops by visiting the website stem-ops.org. That's STEM-OPS.org.
In part 2 of episode 6, Bridging the Divide and Exploring Educational Equity, hosts Boris Franklin and Christopher Etienne draw on their personal experiences to highlight educational disparities taking place on a local and national level. They discuss the differences between education and schooling and the impact that community engagement and organizing has on education as a whole.
I'm Boris Franklin. I'm a formerly incarcerated individual, lead organizer with Jersey City Together, member of the IAF, visiting fellow for the Global Center for Advanced Studies, actor, author, playwright. I'm going to stop there.
My name is Christopher Etienne. I am also a justice-impacted scholar, and I currently work with the Prison Teaching Initiative out of Princeton University. So if we're going to get it started, I want to start off by asking, how can local communities organize? I know that's one of your favorite words right there. But how can local communities organize to create quality education for at-risk minority students?
The first thing I would say is that talk to them. Listen to them. Right? It's such an old school thing, and this is why I think most people won't find it, because it's too simple. It's way too simple. So it's just like if I wanted to be a philanthropist and I wanted to go grocery shopping for you. I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna buy you $400 worth of grocery right now. It's tough out here. I'll meet you at the house. What are the chances I come back with some stuff that you don't eat or you're allergic to?
Highly likely. Very likely.
Even though I meant well. Even though I meant well. So folks who mean well and they want to bring things into the community to get a better education and all these things, I understand that you mean well, but first you need to go talk to that people in those communities and say, what would be better for you? And first of all, that's enough respect for knowing that they know what's better for them. You know how much respect that is for you to say, for you to just bring me something that you thought was good for me? You don't think I have enough intelligence to know what's good for me? You don't think you have a really low opinion of me if you think that this is where it starts at, with that level of disrespect. Go to the community. My mother knows what she wants for her children. Yes, she lives in this poverty-stricken environment, and she works a job that doesn't pay much. My mother learns through her eyes. She can see. She knows what she wants for her children. Go to that community and talk to people. What would be a quality education? What do you think they're going to ask for? They're going to ask for better math class. They're going to ask for what they know would make their children successful, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're going to ask for some things that will be consistent with their community. Mm-hmm. I would ask for, and I don't want to use therapy as a word because people have a reaction to it, but you have to have it in a community where, as though if I'm a child and walking to my school, I've walked past 3 memorials because there were shootings last night. My fight or flight has been activated 3 times before I got to school. That should be taken into account, right? But you have to go to that community. A person who doesn't come from that community doesn't readily know that unless they've spoken to someone from that community. Mm-hmm. and then someone from that community who understands the impact of that, an educated person from that community who comes back and serves that community, who says that we need to have some sort of a trauma center here for the community. This should be a community school in the way in which the parents feel. I got to tell you, PS15 put washers and dryers in the school because some students, ability to learn was being disrupted because they were being picked on because they had dirty clothes. So they had it to where parents could come there and wash for free. You wouldn't know to ask for that. Mm-hmm. I didn't even come up with that. But it damn sure would have helped me when I was in school. Because that was a major problem for me, not having the level of dignity that I wanted when I walked to school, which would have brought the anxiety down. Because I'm not wondering if someone is going to notice the hole in my shoe. I could concentrate a little bit more and focus. But you would have to go to the community and ask them, what are you suffering from? And then allow them to give you an answer. And then you organize. Because all of us can agree these are the things that we want. So we're all together on this. We have different religions, we have different things, but we all agree we want these things. And then we organize and we collectively go at it to whoever we need to go to get them.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that you're on point for pointing a lot of these things out. Like, we should be respected enough to be given a voice, right?
It's laughable when you think about it.
Like we should be. Hey, I'm gonna let you tell me, what you think it should be done. Like, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I would say, and this is kind of echoing a lot of the things that you stated too. Like, I don't think that schools should operate as like this enclave that exists outside of the community. We always speak about separation between church and state, stuff like that. But, we have a bigger issue with this separation between our schools and our communities. Mm-hmm. We literally block off our educational systems from the social issues that are impacting citizens who live in that community every day. And we expect that these students will just forget about these social issues when they enter these classrooms because you're not supposed to bring your outside problems into the school. Mm-hmm. My stomach is rumbling now. How can I not? How can I focus on working when I'm starving?
Hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, exactly. How can I focus on work? And when you stated earlier, walking past these memorials, and when you have like violence constantly occurring into this community.
I know the guy who got killed here last night. I'm walking past where I can see the blood. I'm walking on my way to school.
Matter of fact, they ain't cleaned up the chalk. It's still there. Like I still see the caution tape on the scene. But I'm supposed to forget about that when I step into this school. These schools are built around, like completion rates now. We want to focus heavily on completion rates. Mm-hmm. I don't even think that we really care a lot about grades. Like, if we find somebody who could be the token student, we'll, lift them up and say, hey, this is what our school creates.
That's the money grab. But Durkheim functionist theory, if you go to... when you go through every community, like I told you, when my brother went to Detroit, he said it looks like Newark. Every suburb looks the same as well. Mm-hmm. They're institutions. We all have these institutions, and they all create this functionist theory. This is how this community will function. It's going to keep socially reproducing the same thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So all of that stuff just plays into a bigger system. Each education in each system is a very important key to socially reproducing that same thing.
Yeah. And I think that the only way to break these systems is, like, as you stated, give voice to members of the local community. Because I think that curriculum itself should also be shaped by the people in the community. The parents should be present when the schools are making these decisions. And also, I understand like the myth that people usually state about PTA meetings and stuff like that. I heard often black parents, they don't go to PTA meetings and stuff. And you may be right to a certain extent when it comes to certain people, because I had a mother that used to work shifts back to back. You know, she would come in after an 8 or 10 hour shift, sleep for like 30 minutes, get up and go on to the next shift. So like, how can she make it to a PTA meeting? And so like, rather than critiquing people for not showing up into a PTA meeting, why don't you make things more accessible? Like, hey, you know, we know you couldn't make it, but here's this piece of we mailed this to you.
Send the minutes
you know,
on
like,
with your kids.
yeah, exactly. Like, yo, here, yeah, like the kids have the minute. Hey, here's this email, just so that everybody could be in the know,
Yeah,
rather
send it
than
with
just
that ridiculous permission slip for the $300 you're gonna need if you want your kids to go on this field trip to Washington. Send it with that.
Yeah, send them back home with this information. Give out surveys that allow people to like voice their critiques and participate in decision making. This is what we're going to need to create like real quality education. We need the voices of everybody in that community, and we need to stop separating schools from community issues. If you are a school in a community, you're suffering from the same issues that community is suffering from as well. Because your students are impacted by it every day. And whatever impacts a student outside of the school is going to be a major factor in how that student engages with education in the school walls.
What is the purpose of school?
Schooling.
Yeah. But what is the purpose of school?
Man, I look at schooling and education as two different things. You have schooling, right, that actually teaches you how to operate a specific way, right? Raise your hand, walk in a straight line. That's not education.
See, that's my problem with answering half of the questions. Is like, how do I not say, I have such a critique. Like when a guy would say, why are you going back to college? You don't need college to learn. I never said I was going back to college to learn. I was looking for some cultural capital that was going to allow me to make a little more money and learn. I wasn't going to learn. That's not a place of learning. It hasn't been a place of learning for me since the 5th grade. But having the second chance at education means that now I have an education that will provide me some upward mobility. Not learning anything, it will provide me a measure of cultural capital that I could turn into some cold hard cash because I need a BA or a master's to apply for this position. However, half of the stuff that I remembered through that rote behavior learning for the short-term memory inside of the hippocampus is that I dumped that. None of it's going to be useful. It doesn't educate me, you know. And a lot of people will be able to argue. There's some interesting things that I did learn in school that helped, right? That did give me a bit of an education. But I would say it's 10%, and of course these are wild figures, but I would say it's 10% education and 90% schooling, right? Or whatever your numbers are going to be. But I would agree. It's not much of an education. And it never was much of an education. It's the same as the education that immigrants got coming through Ellis Island. You're going to need to be able to speak the language. You're going to need to be able to follow some instructions. And that's about it, because you're going into service work.
Yeah.
You're not going into knowledge work. And that's what we're socially reproducing out of those environments. And then you say, you know, and we have to socially reproduce poor people, because as most wealthy people would say, well, who's going to take out the garbage?
Yeah, exactly. You know, who's going to do the jobs that we don't want to do? And just to kind of piggyback off what you were stating, yeah, like I feel like I've been in a lot of classes, you know, that just focused on schooling, right? You know, like, hey, how do you respond to authority, basically? It's like a lot of the tests were based on how well I could follow instructions. You know, it wasn't like really challenging my thought. Like, hey, how well can you regurgitate what I told you to basically commit to memory? This is all about instruction following, right? But I would say that all the professors I could like name, they educated me. Edward Ramsamy. You know, like he educated me. Like he showed me,
Professor
hey,
Toby Sanders.
yeah, like Professor Richard Hefner. You know, like these individuals taught me how to critically think. So it wasn't about reading and regurgitating.
Yeah.
It was like reading and seeing how is this applicable to the current world we know right now, right? We were studying segregation, how segregation impacted black communities in the 60s. How did the push to desegregate schools impact institutions long term after that? But like now we're sitting down and we're talking about what does community schools look like? And we're like, well, you remember when schools was segregated like back in the 60s?
Yeah.
And black communities had to pool their resources together to like find proper instructors to actually donate to like the school's infrastructure. Like,
That's the first chance.
Yeah.
That's not your second chance.
Yeah.
That's the first chance. The first chance was basically what it sounds like was schooling.
Yeah.
And now you're getting an education because there are a few radical instructors like Professor Chris Hedges and the likes who really said, you know what, I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to educate you and I'm going to challenge you.
Yeah. A lot of these models that we're building, when we speak about like community schools, we're borrowing from history. We're going back and looking at successful black schools from the 1960s and seeing how they were able to build a sustainable education program, and we're implementing it. Like that's what education is.
Yeah.
You know, like seeing the real world impacts and seeing how is it applicable to your life right now. Like I don't need to know the U.S. presidents in order. Like how is that?
Teach you to live. An
You know,
education
like,
that doesn't teach you to live
like-
is not an education. Because you can't do anything with it.
Yeah.
I mean, when I say live, I mean live as a person in the world, as a democratic being. That education should teach you to be able to participate in life and not marginalize you for the rest of your life. You know, and that is my biggest. I'm so glad that we made it that far because, you know, there's a lot of institutions that I do respect because there are some great professors who are housed in there.
Yeah.
And I don't have enough of the information to say this person is responsible. So I don't want to paint everybody with a brush. But there are most of the school systems are just, I'm not that impressed. I'm not that impressed with them because I don't think that they teach you to live. I think that now that the education is flattened out for everybody, what you have is social capital in the schools. Because if you go to school, your kids go to school in Princeton, the chances are they may be going to school with a future senator because a senator lives in Princeton.
Yeah.
And those kids will know each other through high school. They'll be able to call each other up. They'll be able to barter with one another, you know. So the networking will be better for those students. But even some of them are not getting an education. They're being conditioned to be controlled, you know, through different mediums or whatever, what have you. But
like and you're definitely correct. All of college ends up being just a fraternity, especially if you're talking about elite institutions. They definitely end up being a fraternity that focuses on social capital, that focuses on who you know, like that focuses on networking. And you could be, let's say you could be mediocre. You could be just straight up mediocre. If you have the proper connections, that proper social capital, you'll be able to live lavishly.
yeah,
You know?
cold hard cash. It all turns into one of the resources that we need to have a quality of life. You're gonna have some money. And if you have some money, then you can move into a better community. You know, which I think I'll barrel into the next space. What's your question, 6?
Yeah, 6. Explain the intersection between housing and education.
Yeah, and that's what I didn't want to get ahead of because, you know, now you have an opportunity to live in a different place, to have a different school, which will give a different education and socially reproduce what you have made of yourself, which is the goal to say, okay, if it's middle class, will socially reproduce it.
Mm-hmm.
Your children should be middle class. What is not being discussed is the fact that most people die in the class they were born in. But because there was the benefit of some program that leveled the playing field, you were able to take advantage of that space and time and move up. Not to say that it can't happen for other people, but it takes a lot of work to get this done. So statistically, you know, maybe almost 90% of the population will die in the class they're born in.
Mm-hmm.
That is by design. Like if you read Isabella Wilkerson, who wrote the book Caste, they said like race is the skin, but caste is the bones.
Mm-hmm.
This was borrowed from India. This is, you know, whereas though you're born into a certain caste. Class, you can act your way out of. Caste, you can't get out of.
Yeah.
Can't get out of that. Like Jay-Z can make as much money as he wants. Then there's still people say, I don't care how many albums he put out. I don't want him living in my building.
Mm-hmm.
That's the caste system operating. Now, all these other things like education and housing, they conspire to make sure that the caste system stays in place, right? I tend to agree with the things that Isabella Wilkerson argued in that book, Caste. And that's why when I said that, you know, education, I won't minimize it. It's a very important part of a very, very rigid system that keeps, because this conversation that we're having, you can Google Dr. West and John Henry Clark having the conversation in the 60s.
60s, yeah.
And we'll be having a conversation 20 years from
Here's
now.
what I found on the web.
I didn't ask for that.
Yo, please turn Siri off, man.
You know, we're still having the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody know what needs to be done, but people are comfortable socially reproducing the same thing, and then we're playing this game, this carnival game of who could win a prize against these odds, and then you jump up and down like I made it. Yeah, it's like 1 in a million. What do you know?
Everybody is free-form sprinting, and while you got both legs tied together trying to hop across the finish line, it almost feels like, you know, you're there for entertainment. And the first thing they said, you know what, I admire your ability to persevere. And you're just like, gosh.
This is the Hunger Games?
Yeah, like, is it?
And now they want to hold you up and say, see, anybody can do it. You be like, are you
gosh.
out of your mind? Anybody can't do it.
Man,
I almost didn't do it. I had a few people, you know what I mean, in a few programs. Like, I caught the benefit of NJ Step. If I had gone to jail earlier, see, I wouldn't have been fortunate to catch the benefit of an NJ Step. So you can't say, this guy went to jail, he made something of himself, everybody should be able to make it. No, depends on where you're housed.
Yeah.
It's luck. It's almost
super
luck now.
And I think they said only 6% of people who are incarcerated have access to a higher education in prison program.
Yeah.
So like, it's not like something that, it may be a little bit more common in our circle, but like overall, it's not a normal thing.
No, it's not a normal thing, because you're thinking about us who know each other, but thinking about the people you know from your community back home.
Mm-hmm.
You're like the one person, and I'm like the one person in my community. We just formed another community.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we trickle into the world, then into these spaces, we're still not at the table in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't know how to flip the table and be almost radical Christ-like, then it's like, yeah, that's a great idea. We'll consider that. But coming from you hear that same idea in a different cadence, maybe a month later, and it'll be received pretty differently. Yours will be received like the kid who ties his shoe for the first time, like, look, he can do it. You know, it's like, are you kidding me? Now, we're fighting against a racial backdrop, a caste backdrop, and education and housing are a part of it, because we started with redlining.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason for all of it. Like, it's not separate. It's a system that conspires collectively. It works together to keep reproducing these things, and that makes the whole of society function in a way in which the orchestrators of this society put it together. Our founding fathers drafted a document. So that doesn't have to be a mystery. When you can lay a name and a face on it. They drafted a document for a specific outcome and to make sure that they keep things going the way that they go. They love the status quo. When you're talking about a real education, you're talking about disrupting the status quo. If you give a person a real education, you build a democratic animal.
Yeah, and you build somebody that could bring the system down to his knees. When it comes to this question 6 on my end, the intersection between housing and education. Yeah, I agree. Redlining, like as a primary example. Another major issue that we face is that our property taxes fund our public schools. And so you see a lot of issues here because if you're in a neighborhood where your property value isn't worth squat, right? Like, where is this money? Like, what type of money is really going into these schools? And this is a way that we know that this is inequitable. We know that it's unequal. We know this is discriminatory, but we accepted it as the status quo. We accepted it as the norm because in America, we don't really view education as a right. I don't care who wants to put bells and whistles on it and argue against it. Education is not a right. Education is a privilege that's predicated on your socioeconomic status in society. That's what education is. Mm-hmm. It's not a right, And so we treat it as such by having property taxes fund public schools. And we're not going to see any significant change until we change that way of funding public schools. And so we start funding schools based on need until we create a model. For instance, we see in other countries like the UK, they have a nationwide curriculum. Their idea is that every single school should be teaching these classes. So if a student gets transferred to another school, they're going to be on the same educational track, right? And we have a nationwide curriculum where all right, every student has to learn pre-calc because we know this is damn near prerequisite to get into college, right? Yeah. Every student has to learn writing and research because we know how this is not just an educational skill, it's a transferable skill that allow individuals to go through documents and potentially even critique their government, because we know all of these things are what's happening in the government is documented through news media, it's documented through bills, it's documented through all of these things. So somebody needs to understand, write it, and research to be able to get through the jargon and understand what this bill is actually saying and how it impacts them. So yes, every school needs to teach this write it and research class. Every school needs to teach this financial literacy class. Why? Because students are going to be taking on debt. And they need to understand.
When you start giving people education, it was completely disruptive. Right? Between 60s, 70s, we had some of the biggest movements you can imagine. You had the civil rights movement. You had anti-war movements.
Yeah, you had
your
war against poverty. You had your SNCC.
On those universities.
Yeah.
That is the danger of giving an individual an education.
But it also is the benefit because
so big money gets behind it and says, we want to control the curriculum.
But it's a benefit having diverse minds in different fields. So do you know that our science in America has been stagnated because of exclusionary practices that ensures just white males in this space? Mm-hmm. Because you're talking about white males, so it's a very homogeneous population, right? You're talking about a population of people who come from the same socioeconomic background. Mm-hmm. They probably grew up together, and so there's no diversity in thought because everybody experienced the same and is basically thinking the same in this space. So that's why when you're talking about radical changes to math, you start seeing people of color come in. You start seeing women come in. You start seeing these individuals who don't look anything like the norm in these spaces,
So
are the individuals that are radicalizing these spaces. Huh?
Education, art, politics, all of it has been hijacked by big business.
Yeah.
And market values.
Yeah, like,
so it'd be in their best interest to diversify my company, but I'm still gonna be at the helm. That's where that homogeneous community is sitting. It's where the money's at. And so, so you're still an investment in things staying the way they are. But that bottleneck system, that's where the diversity will come in. But one thing, I researched diversity when I was here, and what diversity really was it wasn't cultural diversity. It was a little bit of color, some ethnicity.
Yeah, it was a sprinkle of some seasoning. You know, like that's all it was. But like, if you're talking about true diversity, like diversity, like, it goes color, it goes socioeconomic background, it goes like the differently abled, it goes like it's just such a diverse field of individuals that should be included, because their perspective could literally move society forward. Like, even if you're into big business, you know, like, even if you're into profit, if you're always bringing up the economy, why wouldn't you want a more innovative, intelligent group of people contributing to the economy? You know, like, it's better for the nation as a whole.
You sound like a humanitarian.
But like, it is crazy because it's considered radical. And it just seems rational to me. And I'm tired of people calling rational logic radical. Like, making education accessible and affordable is rational. It shouldn't be a radical.
What makes it radical is it cuts against the grain, as Dr. West would say. It goes against the norm. That's what makes it radical. The idea may be very rational, but the fact, it's just like when a professor says, I had Miss Toffel, who I thought was my worst teacher, happened to be my best. Mm-hmm. She looked at the curriculum and she said, "This is garbage." My 8th grade year of school, and she said, they said, "Well, you have to teach it." Now, what went against the grain was she said, "I'm not going to just give them this." She gave us all our books on the first day of school. She taught that whole curriculum the first semester. We cried like babies. And then she brought in her own books. She brought in The Good Earth. She brought in The Pearl. That's the first time I went to the theater, saw Don Quixote, the Man of La Mancha, which got me into loving theater. But she said, okay, since I can't get out of giving them this curriculum, I'm going to give it to them, and then I'm going to give them my curriculum. And she gave us a curriculum that helped enrich our lives. But because it was so radical, she cut against the grain, everyone fought against her, even I did. My mother was like, "I'm not taking you out of her class, though." She said she's the first one to challenge you. No teacher had ever challenged me. I was the star kid. I came from that other district. I'm ahead of everybody. This is a cakewalk. Miss Toffel came in and she challenged me. And you need that tension if you're going to grow, just like if you're bodybuilding. Mm-hmm. You need that tension. She came in and she created so much tension. And even the kids who failed the class gained something that helped them push a little further in life, you know. And I've actually been looking for her because I gave her a hard time, and I always wanted to say, so if she ever hears anything on the podcast, Mrs. Toffel was definitely a good educator, you know.
Yeah, like, and I agree that you're right. There's these norms that we have to combat against. My issue is that we just become so accepted. Like, we just became so accepting to these norms that we know is crippling us. It's like these norms are the hot stove, and they're telling you to put your hand on it. Mm-hmm. And they're telling you to hold on until it cools down. Like, this is where we're at. We're looking at we're trusting these norms to our detriment. We're looking at communities in a state of destitution. We're looking at schools in a state of destitution. I remember sitting down with classmates and putting books together with them. because I only had like 2 or 3 chapters. You had the chapters I was missing. He had the chapters that both of us was missing, and she had like the last chapter. We had to come together to form a whole book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was the norm in this classroom.
Absolutely.
Why not challenge these things? Why accept this as just the status quo of living?
You're not taught how to challenge it. Like, it's like when I started organizing. The snapshot that you're giving about organizing is what you've seen in the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement. Mm-hmm. You see a charismatic leader that spoke so eloquently when she described the problem or he described the problem that some well-meaning people said, you know what? They're right. Let's give them what they asked for. That's not how it happens.
Yeah. They
build enough power. Nobody's going to teach you how to build power because then you'd be free. An education, nobody's trying to give out an education. And I hate to say it, that, you know, because I understand the world and how to navigate in this world, I never went to school to get educated. I went to school to get credentialed. I live in the world, and that's why I've been educated. Mm-hmm. I was educated by a man who didn't go to the American school system. My father did not go to school. So he wasn't conditioned to see the world the way in which you and I were. And that was my first educator. Because he would look at me and say, that doesn't make any sense. Can't you see that? But when a person taught you how to read and how to interpret it, when you read a book, you go for who, what, when, where, how, and why. They were giving specific instructions of how to make sense of a document without giving no context, what it means in this space and time or nothing. This is all you need to pull out. So you've been taught how to read. But for me, I would have to come home to an individual who would have to see me function in the house, function in the world. When he says, reach into that toolbox and hand me, you know, a wrench, and I'm sitting there, and he's looking like, you can't figure that out. He said, and you went to school. If he sees a problem on the car and there's no tool in his box, he looks around the yard, and he makes a tool to fit the problem. And he solves the problem. And they call that thinking outside the box. That's the only way I was taught to think. Because he'd be looking at me like, how couldn't you figure that out? Because he thought the school was the premium. But he realized that his education, and not that, you know, not to sound so cliche, but indoctrination was, that's not going to help you in the world. Because that, especially not below the poverty line, we weren't given that kind of, that when we were getting at that school, he realized just through what he was saying that can't be all that good because I can outthink you all day long. I can outthink you all day long, right? And you live in an environment where you need to think. You don't live in an environment that functions well because it has good schools and everybody is making enough money to be in that space. You live in an environment where people are struggling and people are at a disadvantage and people take advantage of other people. You live in an environment where you got to be quick-witted. You live in an environment where you got to have social and emotional skills. You need to be able to look at my face and determine whether or not I'm going to be a problem before I get close enough to grab you. You live in an environment where your senses have to be heightened. You have to think fast.
Yeah, like I think that coming from those spaces, it's like literally how I learned to like navigate the hallway in college. Because like coming into the institution, it was 2 things that helped me. One was boxing, right? When I sat in on my first class and I saw, you know, like how the teacher was running the class, right? She would put like a question out there, you know, for us, assign us a couple of questions to think about. She would assign us some readings. We would write about these questions, write our ideas on these questions, and then we would come into class and discuss them. And I'm like, why am I bored? And I realized that this was the equivalent of like when I was learning boxing and going against somebody who was like just like a straight up amateur with like no skills. They didn't plant their feet. They didn't know how to pivot. There was no force behind their punches. I don't even want to be in this ring no more, right? But then when I sat down with somebody who challenged me, like now I'm like I gotta learn new move. I gotta dip and throw this hook, correctly and connect, and then back up and reassess the situation and and follow through with whether it's going to be this jab or this straight or whatever, right?
Creating a condition and an opportunity to grow.
Yeah. So I realized I had to bring this to the classroom, and I sat down and had sparring matches with my teacher. Like, even if I had to play the devil's advocate, it's against something that I'm making an argument on behalf of something I don't even support. But I need to hear that feedback because I know what I'm thinking, but I don't know what you're thinking. So like, let's have this back and forth. And I can't tell you how much times I done sat down and saw that instructor just start like chuckling, like, well, that's new. I never, never had somebody. And then students in the class are like, now they have some ideas that they want to contribute. So I turned this into a proper sparring match for me. And that was from what I learned from slap boxing in the streets and in the boxing gym.
You created a place of learning.
Yeah. And so I'm like, this is how I'm going to educate myself. And it was the same thing on campus. Like, when I was sitting down trying to figure out how do I create opportunities for me in the future, I took it back to what a lot of us did when we hustled back in the day, trapping. We're like, okay, if you want to move up in the game, you don't stand next to the people that's on the block. They're in the same situation as you. So you had to go through the channels, and I'm like, damn, I had to find out.
But see, what you just did? You created a system, right? It's a bureaucratic system with those levels, right? If this system breaks down, who is at the greatest advantage, right? So think of the system that we're talking about in structure, which has the status quo, right? If the system breaks down and we have that sort of anarchy that we saw at the insurrection, who's running for their lives? See, this is why there's a major investment in a system, because some people are kept in a space that is good for them. They have a particular self-interest in the status quo, in that system. So you need to have these people working, these people managing, and these people getting the benefit, if we can say something like 3 tiers, right? And school is part of the investment in that system, because if that system breaks down, and we have this, they give you movies like Purges or something like that, and we have this sort of, radical movement towards tearing down a system. Some people feel like they'd be vulnerable, so they have an investment to keep on strengthening the studs, to keep on redoing the foundation, to always do work on, just like a house, to make sure it maintains that structure. Because the persons who benefit from it the most, that's in their self-interest. And school is one way of maintaining that system.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's why I look at
it's not an education.
Yeah, like I look at a lot of our comrades from NJ Step, and they participated in their education just like I did. And like I said, we just like the block where you don't want to stand next to the guys who's pumping the $1,000 packs. We ended up looking for the plugs, first probably had to go through the middleman, who the middleman is sitting down with, and then from the middleman to the plugs. And it was the same thing, like sitting down and finding those specific instructors, those professors that pushed me, and having conversations with them, then going to the heads of the departments and sitting down with them, shaking hands, exchanging numbers, starting conversations. And
you're
I
still
realized,
operating within the structure.
yeah, but like I realized that them, like these relationships I was able to build, it placed me outside of this normal pathway that a lot of students was like attempting to follow. Now, like it was through the Africana Studies department I met Dr. Cornell West.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it was through the Africana Studies department I met Angela Davis, and I'm sitting down with people whose primary role is to challenge the system, and I'm learning at their feet now. You know, like and it was through like that strategy from the streets, from the block, you know, like that literally helped me change my perspective.
A different view, like being the guy who sells the weight on the streets. He can't eat without the workers. So he has it, and the workers are usually at a financial disadvantage. That's why they're going to take the horrible deal. That's what makes a capitalist society function. He's gonna take the horrible deal so I can make that profit, so I can stay there. If I level the playing field, then what happens? I need to socially reproduce this guy in order for me to maintain my status as this guy. Or else who's gonna pump the weight? I go find a guy that's down on his luck and I'm like, yo, check it out, I'll give you one every 5. He's gonna would you take that deal?
No.
Absolutely not. But you need a guy whose conditions demand that he take that deal. So you have to socially reproduce poor people, and which means you're going to have to give them a bad education. You're going to have to give them bad water.
Yeah.
You have them bad everything.
Yeah, of course.
In order to keep the system, that's what I'm saying when I look at my levels on the streets, just understanding it. And this allows me to understand the self-interest of the individual who's up and who's down by having that model. I understand that the person that I'm fighting, he wants to stay in that position. And in order for me to get him to do what I want, I'm not going to move him morally. I'm going to need power to move him. And that's where I have to organize that, to build power between organized people and organized money to change that school system, because the school system, if it's not the linchpin, it's a very important part of that system. And we need to disrupt it. And we can start there, because that's, in my opinion, a lot of where it starts at.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. You know, like, and that's what I was stating before. You know, we through so some of these connections I made in my social capital, we were able to sit down with people who were actually there. Angela Davis was actually there. You know, like she was fighting there. Cornell West was there. You know, like and so sitting down with these individuals.
He's running for president now.
Yeah, I know. I was shocked to hear that. I was like, wow, man. Wow. But like it's needed, because like I look at it as, you know, he's going to be able to move thought regardless, you know, because like everybody, when he starts challenging, you know, like these injustices, everyone is going to start echoing them. Like it's much needed that he actually runs to start changing the minds and perspectives of Americans, you know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, like, and I definitely agree. Like, so like being able to sit down with these organizers, because like that's what they are at their core. Mm-hmm. Organizers, like whether you're talking about Huey P, you know, like whether you're talking about Fred Hampton, you know, whether you're talking about Angela, like whether you're talking about like Malcolm, like all of these individuals were organizers that was focusing on how to distribute the tools individuals need, not to just emancipate themselves, but empower themselves and actually build a sustainable community, you know, like that would give them that quality of life that they were seeking out.
Yeah. At the end of the day, that's what you want. You just want to be able to live decent. You know, we make all this fuss, is just that we want to live decent. We want to live safe. Folks who come from challenging spaces, that is the dream. You want to live safe. You want to live decent. And you don't want to live with the level of anxiety. And it's there because the anxiety is higher. You know, a gazelle doesn't have different levels of anxiety. They're all under the same level of danger. Mm-hmm. That's it. Like, we don't want a life without anxiety, but we want the right levels. The increased level of anxiety is because we live in an oppressive space and being oppressed through the education, your development being arrested. You know that I can't, my chances of being able to protect, provide, and guide for my family are going to be difficult. This is all of this, and it started with my education. But by the time you get old enough to know that you have been cut off at the knees, it's like, well, what do I do now? Well, now you got all of the other things are in place. We prepared for you to have a bright idea. First of all, you're too old for a lot of things, right? You're going to need the power of youth. Your cadence has forced you out of being a leader. Like they've put you in, and the mistakes you've made have forced you out of being a leader. So it's going to make it difficult for you to educate other people. And as we've seen with some of our leaders, they attack their character because they grew up at a time when these behaviors were consistent with their conditions. So by the time, it's like when someone runs for politics, they go right for that character. But you did this, you did that. Yeah, under certain conditions, certain things happen. And I'm not excusing anybody's behavior. But what I'm saying is that I think that's baked into the cake as well. Mm-hmm. You know, I talked to a friend of mine who worked at the mayor's office, and I won't give him his name or say which mayor. They already baked into the cake that how long can they actually do that thing that they're doing called advocacy. And they already know that everybody has to get back to work on Monday because they got to pay their bills. They don't live they're not in a position. That's why students were able to do it so long. See, when you have a student movement, they didn't have to go to work. You know, when you're a student, you're not taking care of family the same way your parents were. They could keep this up for a while. That was dangerous, right? But you don't see any real movements coming from our universities anymore. But we've had real issues in the world. Yeah. We have global warming. Yeah. You would think that students would be taking that on. But they put it they have de-radicalized them by giving them a weak education. But that radicalization would move things forward for humanity. Mm-hmm. But that's not the interest. It's not humanity. That would be too inclusive. The interest is to maintain a caste system so things are better for a certain group of people who benefit from the status quo. And that's what's not being said. And that has a racial component, but the racial component is just really another tool, and I'm going to argue again for Isabella Wilkerson book caste, to maintain that caste system, which is even bigger than race.
Race, yeah. Like race just make certain individuals easier to point out. That's really what it is. But man, I think that we should possibly try to give like a brief final thoughts. And so like basically off of everything that, you know, we stated today, I'm going to ask you first because I don't know how to answer this question yet. What is a major takeaway you want to leave with the audience? You know? It's the closing bar, man. So
first, I would maintain that education would teach you to live, and we need to be careful when we. And I like what you said about education and schooling, right? And we don't have to always put education inside of an institution. I think inside of our communities, we should own it. Everything, when it's hijacked by industries and you put money to it, that's why you can't own it, but it should be free. Like a liberal art. You know, this, and then you can go on to whatever schooling and whatever you want to do that gives you credentials to have a job that allows you to earn for your daily bread. But education would create a much more democratic and safer society, and that has to be owned by the people. If we still think that institutions are going to educate us, institutions have a particular agenda, and they are very well staffed, and the agenda has been very well thought out because it is successful. If we want education, then we have to own it, because my father educated me. You don't need to have a degree to teach. You need to have love for the next generation. That is the degree for an education. It has to have that love, because you're going to help produce a citizen and a society that will be here long after you're gone. So that can't be selfish, right? And that would be my takeaway, because as we went through it and we looked at it top to bottom, we flipped it on its head, There's no real investment in it. For it's not in the self-interest of there was a planners elite when they first came here. There's different elites. It's not in the self-interest of the people who control those institutions. You're not going to wrestle control away from them. You don't have leave them to their institutions. Let their institutions function the way they function. If you want an education, then get it and provide it for yourself. And that would be the way to proceed. That would be next steps. And I don't want to try to solve the problems of the world. I'll just go to next steps. Next steps, take back education from institutions who have been bought and paid for and provide it for your families so that your communities will function properly.
Yeah, powerful closing. I guess on my part, we sit down and we have wrongly seen a lot of issues as progress. When I go back and I look at Brown versus Board of Education, and I look at, segregation and integration, and all of these issues that stemmed, from inequalities in the educational system, we see that schools are more segregated now than they were 60, 70 years ago. We see that the same issues as far as a lack of resources, like 20% of students in low-income schools don't even have access to broadband internet and Wi-Fi. Over 30% of students don't have access to that don't have access to those things at home when they leave schools. And so we see a growing digital divide despite us living in this digital age that's advancing every day. We still see such a large portion of the population that's being discounted, that's being overlooked, and that's lacking the proper resources that they need to move forward. And we don't understand that these things are necessary for us to progress as a nation. Students in school should have access to these basic things that they need to learn how to navigate, to complete homework, and also even to acquire some type of employment, like during the summer or after they graduate from high school. But we still have not highlighted that these things are a social need, therefore it's a human right, and everybody should have access to it. I think we started individualizing, or we've been individualizing everything. We started, but like when we're looking at this modern education system, it's truly a segregated caste system, as you stated, but it also individualized social issues that impact a large majority of the population. And we take time to scoop out tokens, individual students, and speak about their progress as if we live in a meritocracy. Mm-hmm. And we don't. We know it's not about hard work. We know it's not about your personal drive. These are not what you need to be successful. Resources, community engagement, wraparound services, these are the things that people who are born into privilege automatically benefit from. Mm-hmm. And we discount those individuals who aren't. And so the only way we could truly move forward and not become a nation that literally just devours itself and end up paying the ultimate price and just crashing and burning because of it, is by acknowledging that these resources are human rights and should be accessible to everyone deserves a quality education. Everyone deserves to feel safe in school. Everyone deserves to have a school that doesn't replicate the practices and the socialization of prisons, right? Everyone deserves to have access to these things. So rather than individualizing issues and preaching this pull yourself up by the bootstrap gospel that we know is BS, let's come together collectively and start understanding, start like literally pouring resources into the upcoming leaders of this nation, because like we're literally hurting ourselves by not extending these opportunities to our youth. And we will crash and burn because of it. All right, man. Well, that's it.
That's a wrap.
Thank you for joining us for part 2 of Bridging the Divide and Exploring Educational Equity in the System Impacted podcast. During this episode, we examined educational disparities through a critical lens and identified how we can implement strategies of past organizers to create inclusive approaches towards educational experiences. Systemic issues have created rifts that continue to impede the progress of low-income communities. Still, we believe that by lifting the voices of the oppressed majority, organizing on a local level, and holding our legislators accountable, we can create a future where younger generations will be granted the comfortability and resources needed to pursue their careers of choice.